the hell you would like to say it. With my wife, I'm the owner of Stephen Pannell Wines in McLaren Vale, and we established the label in 2004, focusing mainly on Grenache. And my role is anything and everything. So from pruning to winemaking, it's more the winemaking side that I'm concentrating on. My father was in the wine industry and he established Mosswood in Margaret River. He was one of the founders of the Margaret River region. And I'd come to study winemaking at Roseworthy. And a friend of mine, Nick Hazelgrove, who was studying with me, was from McLaren Vale, brought me down here. And then I got my first job out of graduating from Roseworthy at Andrew Garrett's, which is the old Serafino. I was working at Wirrawirra, and then I bought my first house on the bottom of Tatachilla Road, and here I am. I'm stuck here now. For me, it was important to make wine that I loved. If you consider winemaking to be an art form, a painter is painting what he loves. He's not painting something hoping that he will sell that. So I'm making wines that are selfish, I suppose, in the way that I like to drink these wines. In terms of our red wines, they're quite tannin proud. That's important for me, that the tannins are part of the wines, especially for food. So that's the ethos. So the most important thing about wine is that it tastes like it comes from somewhere. If the Australian wine industry is to succeed in the future, it's about making wines that are truly unique, and that sense of place, or the French call terroir, that they taste like they come from somewhere. I want wine to taste like it can only come from this landscape. So planting varieties that ameliorate the necessity for winemaking. So what I mean by that is no acid addition, no oak, no those sorts of things. If I peel those things back, then the wine becomes more honest and true to its sense of place. For a long time, it confused me about why we are famous for making big red wines when we live next to an ocean full of seafood. So I think making wine with the way we live and the food that we like to eat, and a lot of that's Asian influenced and spice influenced, is the job now for the Australian wine industry, and certainly us in McLaren Vale, to make wine that goes with the way that we live, not changing our lives to be able to drink a bottle of wine. As a person with ADHD, that's a very difficult question. Look, I mean, Grenache has been there all the way through. Grenache was this cross that I carried from the days in the 90s from Hardy's about making, I suppose if it's summed up, I like red wines that are medium body to light and tannic, and I think they're the wines that hold my interest. We're making Grenaches in McLaren Vale that can't be copied and aren't a copy of anybody else's wines. They are uniquely from McLaren Vale, and I think that's great. And I think there's so many of us now making these wines that can be universally great, and I think that's what we've got to pursue. Food and wine add to the way that we lock away a memory. You can usually, for me, a wine will be with a memory of something that the great wines that I had with a memory with somebody that I do. Grenache and Peking duck is always like, that's hard to beat, and mainly because it's Peking duck more than anything else. And the rosé and squid is my local one that I like, because I catch squid down at Port Wollonga quite often, and a glass of rosé and a thing of squid, it's simplicity, which is what I like. Honestly, to give you an appraisal of vintage takes 5 to 10 years before you fully understand the vintages that you've had. The 22s, I think, in 10 or 15 years will be one of the greatest vintages we ever do in McLaren Vale, I think. For me as a winemaker, what drew me here first was the lifestyle. I mean, living here, you're 35 minutes from the city. We have a house on the coast at Port Wollonga, which is where my soul is. And so the ocean is important to me. I grew up next to the ocean and it's part of me, intrinsically part of me. The ocean has an enormous influence in the wine styles that we make, and then that drives the decisions of the varieties that we're planting. So if we're making ripe, fruit sweet, which McLaren Vale traditionally was known as the mid-palate of Australia, then you're choosing varieties that are medium to light bodied, high in acid and strong in tannin. And so that's the driver. That's why Grenache works, that's why Nero d'Avola works, that's why Aglianico works, that's why a lot of these medium to light bodied acidic tannic varieties work in a maritime climate. The Grenache that sort of inspired me was one from Clarendon Hills in 1992 from Roman Brataziac. The styles of wine that he was making were very forward thinking. European in what drove them, and his Grenaches and his Shirazes, for me, were influential. Mind you, there's lots of people these days that are making awesome wine, people like Pete Fraser, who's really having a crack. There's this old saying that I love: did you know monkeys didn't know how to peel bananas, but one monkey learnt and every monkey knew? What that's saying is there's a style of Grenache that we're all starting to make, be it Ephelion, be it Ministry of Clouds, be it all these people, where despite what the show system is wanting, so they want these very immediate Pinot-like, juicy, light styles of Grenache that are for quick consumption, all of us are searching for more probably Nebbiolo-like Grenaches, which are deeper, more complex, more tannic, beautifully balanced, un-oak influenced, and that's where we're all heading to make this style of wine. We started buying vineyards in 2012, and that was a 17-year process of annoying this guy who owned this vineyard, which we now call Camellia. And we started out, my wife and I, by just making 200 cases of 3 wines. So a Shiraz Grenache, a Shiraz and a Grenache. We own nothing other than some barrels and these grapes. And then we've poured everything that we own back into buying vineyards. And vineyards are really important because winemaking is not something that just happens in a winery. Winemaking is something that happens in a vineyard. So I grow wine as much as I make it, and to do that, I must own the vineyard. So we have about 100 acres between a vineyard in the Adelaide Hills and McLaren Vale now, and everything we've earned, we've poured back into buying it so that we can be self-sufficient. At this stage, we sit about 85% self-sufficient, and that's unusual, especially for a lot of Grenache producers. Camellia is really, really important. That's more Shiraz driven. I'm a big fan of a winery called Wendouree and Clare, and I think those wines speak uniquely of being from that place. So trying to emulate those styles of Shirazes. They're not high in alcohol, they're not what I call gladiatorial Shiraz. They're not big in fat, they're sort of fine and elegant, they're not oak, there's no new oak in them. They're a modern style of Shiraz, which in a funny way harks back to the Shirazes that we made in the 50s and 60s in Australia. We've also got some Cabernet there, some Touriga, Malbec, Fiano, and we just planted a Grenache vineyard there. So that's all at Camellia. And then here at Oliver's Road, when I purchased this place, it was full of Chardonnay, which was an interesting purchase. But we got rid of all the Chardonnay, and now the vineyard is just out here is a 1970 50-year-old Shiraz, and then Nero d'Avola on its own roots and rootstock, Aglianico, Montepulciano, Touriga, and a little bit of Grenache over the back as well. And then we have our Grenache vineyard at Blewett Springs, which is Little Branch, which is all Grenache with a little bit of Grenache Gris that we use to make rosé. Most of the time, vine age is used as a marketing tool more than a qualitative thing. But in saying that, the life cycle of a human being is not that dissimilar to a vine. So my son's 21 and we're getting on really well right now. So that's how it transitions. There's the teenage years, which is a bit out of balance, but having old vines is important because the yields seem to fall down as they grow old, and they change from a vineyard more to an orchard because you lose vines. And having the 100-year-old, the 1920 stuff has been fantastic for us. I see it as my responsibility as a human being to take care of the land that I have, not a marketing tool. And so I use these things more for my own self-worth, that not using pesticides, not using herbicides, being in balance is important. One of the vineyards we have, Camellia, is actually a vineyard in a forest. So it's unique in that way, in that it's completely surrounded by forest. It's 80 acres, 25 acres of vines, and the rest is forest. That is important because of the microflora and all the natural predators that exist. There's a thing called rust mite that you see on a leaf where the leaf gets, and that's a little spider. We never get rust mite at Camellia because of the microbats and the birds and all the things that live around these vineyards that keep this vineyard in balance. So when we bought the vineyard, I was just wholly focused on the vineyard, and slowly but surely I've moved away from managing a vineyard to managing a forest. In these forests, native orchids, we've got eight or nine species of native orchids. We have echidnas, we have all these things. And so we spent, I can't tell you how many tens and tens of thousands of dollars pulling olive trees out. We work with Biodiversity McLaren Vale, replanting native species. correcting the land so that it's self-healing the vines in a way, in a balance. And that's been a huge lesson for me about encouraging kangaroos. People go, oh, this bird will eat that and the kangaroo will eat this. And I was like, well, in my vegetable gardens, I have part of it that I'm quite happy for the snails to eat because they've got to live and be too. So I'm encouraging nature to live, and I think the long-term goal for me would be we need to create corridors within McLaren Vale where nature can move and exist and live, and we need to encourage it more than just be this monoculture of just vineyards everywhere. I don't love the word sustainability because there was a Finnish philosopher who said, if I was to ask you about your relationship and you answered me that it was sustainable, it's hardly moving forward. So I think we need to move the goal away from being sustainable to being optimal. And I think that's where sustainability is the minimum we can hope to achieve. And so for me, it's a greater goal than that. I'm very proud of the fact that Grenache is finally coming to the fore. I remember when I made my first one, this was 1995 when I arrived at Tintara, and the winery didn't make any wines with its own label on it, and trying to make wines that the people that were working there could be proud of was important for them, the morale of the whole place. So we started to make these Tintara Cellars wines, and we released a Shiraz and a Grenache. And releasing a straight Grenache at that point in 1995 was seen as quite loco. At the same time, Chester was advertising, and I'll never forget it, for a Grenache at $1,000 a tonne in the local paper. And so everyone was going, oh, he's mad. So between Chester and myself, I've now been making, what does everybody says? Oh, Grenache is an overnight success. And it's like, well, it's been now 30 years of making Grenache in McLaren Vale. And I think we're finally getting to a point where we've examined all the things that make Grenache important. But Grenache's strength is that it's medium to light bodied. And so with the advent of the popularity of Pinot Noir, it's given license to people to make Grenaches that are more light-bodied and medium-bodied and pretty and defined. And I think great wine always is a contradiction in itself. And the easiest way to explain that is I'm trying to make a wine that is powerful, concentrated, complex, dense, and intense. And yet I want a wine to be elegant, refined, delicate, with finesse. So if I can get these two things contradicting and working against each other, and the easiest way to explain that is get tension within this wine, that's what holds your interest when you're tasting this wine. It's like a piece of pop music that you listen to 3 times and go, right, that's it, I'm done, I never need to listen to that again. Whereas a piece of music you have and it challenges you and you're still listening to it 30 years later, that's a great piece of music. So the similarities are what we draw with wine, and I think that's where Grenache fits. It can do that. It does have tension. We don't need to add anything to it in terms of acidity because it keeps a low pH. We don't need to over ripen them. Is it challenging? Yes, it's the most difficult wine that I make because it ripens so randomly and quickly. It's always a great sigh of relief when you picked it at the right time. That's hard because you're hand picking, so you have to get all these gangs organised, get them out and get them on top of it. I use a philosophy when we're making Grenaches. A French winemaker said to me that if you think Pinot is ripe, then you missed it. So you're trying to pick things at this preemptive stage always. So just trying to keep them tighter. And then it's the same with bottling. You're like, making a wine is like having a spring, and as it ages, it unravels. If it's ready to drink when you bottle it, the thing will just fall apart. So all that learning is important. And I think the other thing that's important for people to understand, there's less than 6% of the grapes in McLaren Vale are Grenache. It's tiny. And old vine Grenache is even tinier than that. So it's a very small commodity that we're talking about, but I think these wines are unique. They can't be made anywhere else. And that's the most important thing for us. As an Australian wine industry going forward, we need to really be making wine that is uniquely ours, that we own, and that can only be made in this landscape. And that's dependent on the variety, and I think Grenache is the beginning of that story.